Alan Moore once wrote Star Wars comics. Next to Captain Britain, this is one of the few times he actually wrote for Marvel. Dark Horse compiled his Star Wars work into a series called Devil World. The story opens with Vader playing a chess-like game against a beautiful woman. Vader is being targeted by an order of mystics who turn people's guilt on themselves so intensely it makes them want to kill themselves. Vader, of course, lets him in, while sacrificing tons of stormtroopers, as you do. The mystic attempts to turn all of Vader's guilt in on himself. And you know what happens? Nothing. Vader just fries him. Moore seems to really like to emphasize Vader's cold, calculating side. We see that in the second story, where Vader makes up a story about a time-traveling crystal that Leela hopes can save Alderaan. It was just a ploy to blow them up. Would have worked too if Luke didn't have his lightsaber. Continuity heads may be interested in the second story, which is about how Han got the Millennium Falcon. It was an experimental prototype of an existing ship called the Millennium Hawk. The last one is probably the best one. As well as Lucas, he receives a distress call on a desolate planet, littered with the bodies of dead Jedi. He eventually finds the person who called it, a 7-year-old member of a mystic society. Member of a mystic society the Jedi once went to war with. It was the Jedi that were responsible for the destruction of this planet. He's been waiting this whole time to get his revenge. This is classic Alan Moore. Taking something so basically heroic and showing them as a darker force. Implies that the Jedi were not the only order of mystics. Make their reputation and power not by being virtuous heroes, but by eliminating all the others. And this is the second. The first story involves C-3PO and R2-D2 being dumped on a planet. It's an intergalactic junkyard for old droids. Also, they spell R2-D2's name R2, which is fun. We find out pretty quickly that this planet is not all it seems, as the centuries of dumping droids have formed almost a sentient planet that the robots now worship as a god. Your best friend and mine, C-3PO, almost has a religious experience on this planet. The second story involves Han and Leia ending up confronting some Doctor Who villains who have strange metafictional powers that exist outside of the known universe, and they've captured a hyper-powerful entity that they have in a zoo. Of course, the hyper-powerful entity gets out because of Chewie, and does this to the weird space wizards. You must like this shot. Now, the last one is just wild. Involves Layla crash landing on a planet. It's home to these strange god-like beings who can bend reality to their will. It, of course, involves copious amounts of stormtrooper torture, as is tradition. This might be one of the stranger Star Wars things I've ever experienced, like going full psychedelia. I'll shout out John Strokes, the illustrator, for how creative these character designs are. Also, great name for an artist. When I first heard that Alan Moore had written Star Wars comics, I assumed this was just like a for-hire job for him. No, not everything can be a classic, and I certainly had never heard of him working on Star Wars. But no, I was pleasantly surprised. Both of these books contain unique short stories. Someone who had a clear vision for how he wanted Star Wars to be. And yes, Alan Moore happens to be one of my favorite writers of all time. Star Wars is one of my favorite things of all time. But I'm bad with hype. I overhype things in my head all the time, and I found these to be a pleasant surprise.